The so-called climate independents, well, so-called because the 20 or so of them are not independent. For a start, they're all funded by Climate 200, run by billionaire's son to run against the Liberals. But now there's something else that some have in common: hostility to Israel. The latest, Joe Dyer, running in South Australia, has recommended people read a piece attacking Israel, saying a lucid, persuasive piece on our responsibility to stand in solidarity with Palestine. Turns out it's a piece claiming the Israeli state depends on dispossessing Palestinians and so by nature will constantly create and recreate violence, just as Australian settler state supposedly did. Now, this comes after another climate independent, former ABC journalist Zoe Daniels, signed a journalist petition last year claiming Israel maintains an apartheid regime against Palestinians and calling on editors to avoid both siderisms that equates the victims of a military occupation, the Palestinians, with its instigators, Israel. And third example, climate independent Allegra Spender was chosen to run in Wentworth by a group whose four original leaders include an activist who calls for the boycott of Israel, an apartheid state, she says, although Spender herself has since said she's a supporter, strong supporter of Israel. Joining me is David Adler, President of the Australian Jewish Association. David, thanks for your time. Joe Dyer recommending a piece claiming Israel depends on dispossessing Palestinians and so by nature will constantly create violence. Your response?
Look, this is almost like a Groundhog Day. There seems to be a political equation that Green plus leftist equals anti-Israel obsession. And I've really got to start wondering whether this obsession with criticising the only Jewish state on earth and in a manner that no other country in the world is criticised, does that cross the line into anti-Semitism? Now, I want to be careful not to accuse any of the individuals of being anti-Semites, but it does raise a smell about it, and we have concerns.
Now, is this a coincidence, do you think? I mentioned three examples. Is this a coincidence, or is it a pattern, do you think, of anti-Israel sentiment in the climate independence or more broadly the left?
Well, Andrew, I think the proof is if you have a look at which organisations in Australia have taken the trouble to formally reject the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. That's the world's most widely accepted and credible definition, and it does create boundaries as to when criticism of Israel can be done like criticism of any other country, or when it crosses the line and becomes anti-Semitic. And the two Australian organisations which have rejected this approach are firstly the Australian Greens and secondly the ABC. We're not aware of any other significant organisation in the country which has gone down this path. Now, I should point out, it just so happens that tomorrow evening a motion comes up before one of the Melbourne councils that has a large Jewish community, the Glen Eira Council, as to whether it should adopt the definition. They are being lobbied by an extremist Green left group to reject it. So absolutely there is a pattern. There's an institutional pattern, and there's a pattern amongst the individuals that subscribe to those political movements as well.
David, it's David Adler. It's been a real concern to me for some time, as you know, and I know it has been with you. Thank you very much for your time. Now, I've said in the past, New Zealand has